The bullet meant for Rebecca Rothwell tore through her husband's chest instead, and in the 3 seconds it took him to collapse into the dusty street of Agua Caliente, Arizona. She learned that the man she had trusted with every fiber of her being had been stealing from the mining company for nearly 2 years. It was June of 1882, and the heat shimmered off the desert sand like liquid glass. Rebecca stood frozen in the doorway of the general store, her basket of supplies forgotten at her feet as Marshall Davies crouched beside Thomas's dying body. The words spilling from Thomas's blood-flecked lips were a confession, tumbling out in desperate gasps as if he could somehow bargain with death itself. He had taken gold. He had falsified records. He had planned to disappear with Rebecca to Mexico that very night, leaving his debts and his crimes behind. The worst part, the part that made Rebecca's knees buckle, was that he had involved her name in the scheme. Letters existed, he gasped, letters forged with her signature that implicated her as his accomplice. Then Thomas Rothwell died in the street with his eyes on his wife's face, and Rebecca understood that his betrayal would outlive him. The marshal hauled her into his office within the hour. The letters were produced, her signature so perfectly mimicked that even she had to look twice to see the subtle differences. Thomas had been meticulous in his deception, and now Rebecca stood accused of conspiracy to commit theft. The mining company wanted their gold back, and they wanted someone to pay for it. "I did not know," Rebecca said, her voice hollow. "I swear before God I did not know." Marshall Davies studied her with weary eyes. He was an older man, grizzled and weathered by decades of frontier justice. "I believe you, Mrs. Rothwell, but belief does not matter much in a court of law. These letters exist. Your husband is dead and cannot testify to forging them. The company has already sent for their lawyer from Tucson." Rebecca spent that night in a cell that smelled of old sweat and despair. She sat on the narrow cot and stared at the adobe wall, trying to understand how her life had shattered so completely in a single afternoon. She had met Thomas 3 years ago in Santa Fe, where she had been working as a seamstress. He had been charming and attentive, speaking of his prospects in the Arizona territory with such confidence that she had believed in his dreams. They had married after a courtship of 4 months, and she had moved to Agua Caliente expecting to build a life of respectability and modest comfort. Now she realized she had never truly known him at all. The trial lasted 3 days. The mining company's lawyer was a sharp-faced man from Philadelphia who spoke in clipped, educated tones that made the jury of rough frontier men lean forward to hear every word. He painted Rebecca as a scheming accomplice who had helped her husband steal nearly $4,000 in raw gold over the course of 23 months. The evidence seemed damning. Rebecca sat in her plain black mourning dress and felt the jury's eyes on her like weights. Her court-appointed lawyer did his best, but he was young and inexperienced, barely 2 years out of some Eastern law school. He argued that Rebecca had no knowledge of her husband's crimes, that the letters were obvious forgeries, that she had no access to the company records or the gold itself. But the jury looked skeptical. It was the testimony of Henry Hawthorne that saved her from prison. Rebecca had noticed him in the courtroom on the 2nd day of the trial. He sat in the back row, a tall man with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of worn leather. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim trousers, a faded shirt, and a hat that had seen better days. She had no idea who he was or why he was there. On the morning of the 3rd day, her lawyer called him to the stand. Henry Hawthorne removed his hat as he approached the witness box, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. He placed one calloused hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth in a voice that was deep and steady. Then he sat down and looked directly at the prosecutor. I work for the Triple H Ranch, about 8 miles north of town, Henry began. I have been there for 6 years, ever since I came up from Texas. I make supply runs into Agua Caliente twice a month, and I know most folks around here by sight if not by name. What does this have to do with the case at hand? The prosecutor asked impatiently. I saw Thomas Rothwell meeting with a man named Jack Sutter on 4 separate occasions over the past year, Henry said. Always at night, always behind the closed-down livery stable at the edge of town. I would not have thought much of it, except that Jack Sutter is known to run stolen goods down into Mexico. He has been suspected of it for years, though no one has ever caught him with proof. The courtroom stirred with interest. Rebecca's lawyer leaned forward. Did you ever hear what they discussed? He asked. On the last occasion, about 6 weeks ago, I heard Thomas Rothwell tell Jack Sutter that he had one more delivery to make, and then he would have enough to disappear. He said his wife knew nothing, and that he intended to keep it that way until they were across the border. He said she was too honest to understand what a man had to do to get ahead in this world. Rebecca felt something crack open in her chest. Even in his betrayal, Thomas had known her well enough to keep her ignorant. She did not know whether to feel relieved or more wounded by this. The prosecutor stood up quickly. Why did you not report this to the authorities when you heard it? Henry met his gaze without flinching. Because I mind my own business as a general rule. I have seen too many men get killed for involving themselves in other people's affairs, but I will not sit by and watch an innocent woman go to prison for her husband's crimes. How do we know you are telling the truth? The prosecutor demanded. How do we know you are not simply trying to protect Mrs. Rothwell for your own reasons? You can check with the Triple H Ranch. They will confirm I make those supply runs twice a month. You can ask around about Jack Sutter and his reputation. You can investigate Thomas Rothwell's movements and see if they line up with what I am saying. But most importantly, you can use your common sense. If Mrs. Rothwell was part of this scheme, why would her husband have been meeting with a smuggler alone? Why would he have said she knew nothing? The prosecutor had no good answer for that. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. They found Rebecca not guilty of all charges. She walked out of that courtroom a free woman, but she felt nothing like relief. She felt hollowed out, as if someone had scraped away everything inside her and left only an empty shell. Henry Hawthorne was waiting on the courthouse steps when she emerged into the blazing afternoon sun. Mrs. Rothwell, he said, touching the brim of his hat. I wanted to make sure you were all right. Rebecca looked at him properly for the first time. He was perhaps 30 years old, with a face that was more interesting than handsome. There were lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, and a small scar cut through his left eyebrow. His hands were work-roughened, and he stood with the easy balance of a man who spent most of his life on horseback. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "You do not even know me." "I know you did not deserve to go to prison for something you did not do," he said simply. That seemed reason enough. Rebecca felt her throat tighten. She had been holding herself together through sheer force of will for days, and this unexpected kindness threatened to break through her defenses. "Thank you," she managed. "I do not know how to repay you." "No repayment needed," Henry said, "but I will say this. Agua Caliente is a small town, and people have long memories. Even though you were found not guilty, there will be those who believe you were involved in your husband's crimes. Life might be difficult for you here." Rebecca knew he was right. She could already feel the stares of the people on the street, the whispers that followed in her wake. The mining company had lost $4,000, and someone had to be blamed for it. Thomas was dead, but she was still here. "I have nowhere else to go," she said quietly. "I have no family, no money for travel. Everything Thomas and I had has been seized by the company to pay back what was stolen." Henry was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. Then he said, "The Triple H Ranch is looking for a cook. The last one quit a month ago, and the hands have been taking turns making meals. Most of them cannot cook worth a damn. The pay is not much, but it includes room and board in a cabin on the property. If you are interested, I could speak to Mr. Harrison, the ranch owner." Rebecca stared at him. "You would do that for me? After everything?" "I would," Henry said. "Like I said, you do not deserve to suffer for another man's sins." She wanted to say yes immediately, but fear held her tongue. How could she trust this? How could she trust him? Thomas had seemed trustworthy too, and look how that had ended. Every instinct screamed at her to be cautious, to protect herself, to never again put her faith in someone else's promises. But what choice did she have? "I would be grateful for the opportunity," she said carefully. "If Mr. Harrison is willing to hire me." "I will talk to him today," Henry promised. "Come out to the ranch tomorrow morning. It is 8 miles north on the main road. You cannot miss it." Then he settled his hat back on his head, nodded to her once more, and walked away. Rebecca watched him go, this stranger who had saved her from prison and was now offering her a lifeline. She did not know what to make of him, and she did not trust the small flutter of hope in her chest. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment. She had learned that lesson well. Rebecca spent her last night in Agua Caliente in a boarding house room that smelled of dust and creosote. The landlady had been reluctant to rent to her, even for a single night, and had demanded payment in advance. Rebecca had exactly $7.30 to her name, all that remained after the company had taken everything else. She lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the desert night through the open window. Tomorrow she would go to the Triple H Ranch. She would take the job if it was offered. She would work hard and keep her head down and rebuild her life one careful step at a time. But she would never again make the mistake of trusting someone completely. She would never again allow herself to be so vulnerable. The vow felt like armor around her heart, cold and unyielding. The next morning, Rebecca packed her few belongings into a single carpet bag and began the 8-mile walk to the Triple H Ranch. The sun was already fierce by the time she left town, and the road stretched out before her like a ribbon of pale dust cutting through the desert. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels on either side, their arms reaching toward the cloudless sky. Heat waves shimmered in the distance, and sweat soon soaked through the back of her dress. She had been walking for nearly 2 hours when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Rebecca moved to the side of the road, expecting the rider to pass by. Instead, the horse slowed to a walk beside her. It was Henry Hawthorne. "Mrs. Rothwell," he said, and there was a note of concern in his voice. "You are walking to the ranch in this heat." "I have no horse," Rebecca said, too tired to feel embarrassed. "Walking was my only option." Henry dismounted in one smooth motion. "You should have sent word. I would have come to fetch you." He untied his canteen from the saddle and offered it to her. "Drink. You look about done in." Rebecca hesitated, then took the canteen. The water was warm but clean, and she drank gratefully. When she handed it back, Henry was studying her with those steady brown eyes. "You are going to ride the rest of the way," he said. It was not a question. "I could not impose," Rebecca began, but Henry was already helping her up into the saddle. "It is not an imposition. It is common sense." He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to take the reins. Rebecca stiffened at his proximity, at the unfamiliar intimacy of sharing a horse with a man who was essentially a stranger. "I am not going to hurt you," Henry said quietly, as if he could read her tension. "I am just going to get you to the ranch before you collapse from heat exhaustion." Rebecca forced herself to relax, though her shoulders remained rigid. She could feel the solid warmth of him at her back, could smell the scent of sun-heated cotton and leather and horses. It had been 3 weeks since Thomas died. 3 weeks since she had learned that her entire marriage had been built on lies. The closeness of another human being felt both comforting and terrifying. They rode in silence for a while. The horse moved at an easy walk, and Rebecca found her body swaying with the rhythm despite her determination to hold herself apart. The desert landscape rolled past, all muted greens and browns, and the occasional splash of wildflower color where water had collected in the low places. "Mr. Harrison agreed to hire you," Henry said after a time. "He was glad to hear you would take the position. Like I said, the hands have been doing their best with the cooking, but it has not been going well. Last week, Rusty tried to make biscuits and they came out hard as rocks. We had to throw them away before someone broke a tooth." Rebecca felt the corner of her mouth twitch despite everything. "I can make proper biscuits." "Then you are already worth your wages," Henry said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Rebecca asked suddenly. The question had been burning in her mind since yesterday. "You do not know me. You have no reason to help me." Henry was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "My mother was widowed when I was 12 years old. My father was killed in a ranch accident, and there were people in our town who said she was to blame. They said she had distracted him, that she should have been watching more carefully. It was not true, but that did not matter. People decided she was at fault, and they made her life hell for it. If someone had helped her back then, things might have been different." "What happened to her?" Rebecca asked softly. "She remarried a year later to a man who promised to take care of us. He turned out to be a drunk who spent her money and raised his fists when he was angry. She stayed with him until I was old enough to leave home, then she finally found the courage to walk away. She is in San Antonio now, living with my sister and her family. She is happy, I think, or as happy as she can be after everything." "I am sorry," Rebecca said. "It taught me something important," Henry said. "It taught me that sometimes people need help even when they have done nothing to deserve the trouble they are in. And it taught me that standing by and doing nothing is its own kind of sin." Rebecca absorbed this, feeling something shift in her understanding of the man behind her. He was not just being kind to a stranger. He was trying to right an old wrong, trying to be the person his mother had needed all those years ago. "I will not disappoint you," she said. "I will work hard." "I do not doubt it," Henry said. They crested a low rise, and the Triple H ranch spread out before them. It was bigger than Rebecca had expected, with a main house built of adobe and dark timber, several barns and outbuildings, and corrals holding at least 20 horses. A windmill turned lazily in the breeze, pumping water into a large wooden tank. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing on the sparse desert grass. Henry guided the horse toward a small cabin that stood a little apart from the other buildings. It was simple but well-maintained, with a wooden porch and a door that had been painted blue at some point in the distant past. "This will be your cabin," Henry said as he helped her down from the horse. "It is not much, but it is clean and the roof does not leak. The kitchen is in the main house, and the hands eat their meals in the dining hall attached to it. Breakfast is at 6, lunch at noon, and supper at 6 in the evening. There are usually about 12 men to cook for, sometimes more during roundup season." Rebecca looked at the cabin, at this small space that would be hers and hers alone. After sharing a boarding house room and before that a home with Thomas, the idea of solitude felt like a gift. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Henry touched his hat brim. "I will introduce you to Mr. Harrison and show you the kitchen. Then I will leave you to settle in." Thaddeus Harrison was a barrel-chested man in his late 50s with a thick mustache and eyes that assessed Rebecca with the practiced gaze of someone who had hired many workers over the years. He shook her hand with a grip that was firm but not crushing. "Henry speaks highly of you, Mrs. Rothwell," Harrison said. "I will be plain with you. I know about the trial, and I know there are people in town who still think you were involved in your husband's theft. I do not care about any of that. What I care about is whether you can cook decent food and keep the kitchen running smoothly. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir," Rebecca said. "I can." "Then we will get along fine. You will be paid $20 a month plus your room and board. I expect meals to be hot and on time. I expect the kitchen to be kept clean. Beyond that, how you manage things is your business. Do you have any questions?" "No, sir." "Good. Henry will show you around. Welcome to the Triple H." The kitchen was spacious and well equipped, with a large cast iron stove, plenty of counter space, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. There was a pump for water inside the building, which Rebecca appreciated, and the dining hall had 3 long tables with benches that could seat 20 men comfortably. "The previous cook left some recipes written out," Henry said, showing her a notebook that sat on one of the shelves. "You do not have to follow them if you have your own ideas, but they might be helpful for learning what the hands like." Rebecca paged through the notebook, seeing instructions for stews and roasts and various forms of beans and bread. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "This is very helpful," she said. "If you need anything from town, make a list and I will pick it up on my next supply run," Henry told her. "That will be in 4 days. In the meantime, there should be enough here to work with." He showed her the smokehouse where the meat was kept, the root cellar where vegetables and other stores were preserved from the heat, and the chicken coop where she could gather eggs each morning. Then he walked her back to her cabin and paused at the bottom of the porch steps. "The hands are good men for the most part," Henry said. "But if anyone gives you trouble, you come find me or tell Mr. Harrison." "Understood, understood," Rebecca said. Henry nodded and turned to leave. Then he paused and looked back at her. "I am glad you are here, Mrs. Rothwell. I think this will be good for you." Rebecca did not know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded. She watched him walk away toward the barns, his long-legged stride eating up the distance. Then she went into her cabin and closed the door behind her. The space was simple but clean, just as Henry had promised. There was a narrow bed with a frame made of bent willow branches, a small table with 1 chair, a trunk for storage, and a fireplace for heat during the cold desert nights. A single window looked out toward the main house, and cheerful yellow curtains framed the glass. Rebecca set her carpet bag on the bed and sat down beside it. For the first time in weeks, she was alone with no immediate crisis to manage. The silence pressed against her ears. She thought she should feel relief or perhaps gratitude for this second chance. Instead, she felt numb. Thomas's betrayal had cut deeper than she had allowed herself to admit. It was not just that he had lied to her. It was that he had made her doubt her own judgment. How had she not seen it? How had she lived with him for 3 years and never suspected that he was capable of such deception? What did that say about her? She had thought she knew what love looked like. She had thought trust was something you gave to the person who promised to spend their life with you. Now she understood that trust was a weapon that could be used against you, and love was just another word for vulnerability. Rebecca unpacked her few belongings and arranged them in the cabin. Then she walked to the kitchen to prepare her first meal for the ranch hands. She had 3 hours until supper, which was enough time to make something simple but satisfying. She decided on beef stew with fresh biscuits and canned peaches for dessert. The work was familiar and soothing. She browned the meat, chopped onions and carrots, added water and seasonings. She mixed flour and lard and buttermilk for the biscuits, kneading the dough with practiced hands. The kitchen grew warm from the heat of the stove, and Rebecca found herself falling into the rhythm of it, letting the simple tasks occupy her mind. The ranch hands began filing into the dining hall at 6 o'clock sharp. They were a rough-looking group, sunburned and dusty from a day's work, but they removed their hats as they entered and nodded politely to her. Henry was among them, and he gave her a small smile of encouragement. Rebecca served the stew in large bowls and brought out platters of biscuits and butter. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who had burned thousands of calories during the day. For several minutes, the only sounds were spoons scraping against bowls and the occasional request to pass the bread. Then an older man with silver hair and a deeply lined face looked up from his food. "Mrs. Rothwell, this is the best meal we have had in a month. Thank you." A murmur of agreement went around the table. Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You are welcome. These biscuits are not trying to kill us," another man said with a grin directed at someone across the table. "That is a nice change." "I told you it was not my fault," the target of the comment protested. "The oven was running too hot." "The oven was fine. Your cooking was what was running too hot." Laughter rippled through the group, and Rebecca found herself relaxing slightly. These men were not threatening. They were just hungry workers grateful for a decent meal. After supper, she cleaned the kitchen and covered the leftover stew for the next day's lunch. The sky was deepening to purple when she finally stepped outside, exhausted but satisfied with her first day's work. Henry was sitting on the porch of her cabin. Rebecca startled slightly, not having expected to find anyone there. He stood up quickly, holding his hat in his hands. "I am sorry," he said. "I did not mean to startle you. I wanted to check and make sure your first day went all right." "It went fine," Rebecca said. "The men were polite." The men were more than polite. They were impressed. "I have not seen them that enthusiastic about food since the last cook was here." Henry smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warmer. "You are going to be a valuable addition to this ranch." Rebecca climbed the porch steps and leaned against the railing, suddenly too tired to stand without support. "I am just glad I can earn my keep. You are doing more than that." Henry settled his hat back on his head. "Well, I will let you rest. You must be exhausted." "Wait," Rebecca said, surprising herself. "I never properly thanked you for testifying at my trial. You saved my life, or at least my freedom. That is not a small thing." Henry looked at her for a long moment. "You do not need to thank me for telling the truth, Mrs. Rothwell." "Rebecca," she said. "You can call me Rebecca." Something flickered in his eyes, but his expression remained neutral. "Rebecca, then, and I am just Henry. We do not stand much on formality around here." "Good night, Henry." "Good night, Rebecca." She watched him walk away into the gathering darkness, and for the first time since Thomas died, she felt something other than numbness or fear. It was just a small flicker, easily ignored, but it was there nonetheless. She refused to examine it too closely. The days fell into a pattern. Rebecca rose before dawn to start breakfast, feeding the ranch hands eggs and bacon and potatoes and endless quantities of coffee. She prepared lunch, often something simple like sandwiches or leftover stew. Then she started on supper, which was always the most substantial meal. In between, she cleaned the kitchen, gathered eggs from the chickens, and planned the next day's menus. It was hard work, but she found it satisfying. There was something deeply reassuring about the routine, about knowing exactly what was expected of her and being able to deliver it. The ranch hands were appreciative, always thanking her for the meals and sometimes offering to help with heavy lifting or other tasks that required more physical strength than she possessed. Henry appeared often, always with some practical reason. He brought her fresh eggs when she mentioned the chickens were not laying as well as she had hoped. He fixed a squeaky board on her porch without being asked. He sat at the table in the dining hall during meals and made quiet conversation about the weather or the cattle or the state of the range. Rebecca noticed all of this, but she kept her distance emotionally. She was polite but not warm. She answered his questions but did not ask many of her own. She could not afford to let her guard down, not even with someone who had been nothing but kind to her. Trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. 2 weeks after she arrived at the ranch, Henry asked if she would like to accompany him on a supply run to Agua Caliente. "You mentioned needing some things that are not in the general stores here," he said. "I thought you might want to pick them out yourself." Rebecca's first instinct was to say no. The idea of returning to Agua Caliente, where people still whispered about her, made her stomach clench. But she did need several items and she could not avoid the town forever. "All right," she said. "When are you going?" "Tomorrow morning. We would leave at dawn to beat the worst of the heat." They set out the next day in a wagon pulled by 2 sturdy horses. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with streaks of gold and pink. Rebecca sat on the wooden bench beside Henry, her hands folded in her lap and her bonnet shading her face. The morning air was cool, almost pleasant, and the desert was alive with the sounds of birds and small creatures stirring from their nighttime burrows. Henry drove the wagon with easy competence, the reins loose in his hands. For a long time neither of them spoke. Then Henry said, "You have been at the ranch for 2 weeks now. How are you finding it?" "It is good," Rebecca said carefully. "Mr. Harrison is a fair employer and the work is manageable." "That is not what I meant," Henry said. "I meant how are you doing? Are you settling in? Do you feel safe there?" The question surprised her with its directness. She glanced at him, but he was looking straight ahead at the road. "I feel as safe as I am likely to feel anywhere," she said finally. Henry nodded slowly. "That is something, I suppose." They were quiet again for a while. Then Rebecca found herself asking, "Why do you care?" "Why do I care about what? About whether I am settling in or feeling safe?" "You have already done more for me than anyone had a right to expect. You testified at my trial, you helped me get this job, you have been nothing but kind. Why does it matter to you whether I am happy?" Henry considered the question for a long moment. "I suppose because I have seen what it looks like when someone loses their ability to trust the world. My mother was like that after my stepfather. She lived the rest of her life expecting the worst from people. It made her hard and bitter, and I hated watching that happen to her. I guess I do not want to see the same thing happen to you." Rebecca felt something twist in her chest. Maybe being hard and bitter is safer than being soft and trusting. "Maybe," Henry agreed, "but it is also a sad way to live." They arrived in Agua Caliente just after 9 in the morning. Henry parked the wagon in front of the general store and helped Rebecca down. She could feel eyes on her as soon as her feet touched the ground. 2 women standing outside the dry goods shop stopped their conversation to stare. A man loading supplies onto a buckboard looked her up and down with obvious disapproval. Rebecca lifted her chin and walked into the general store with her shoulders back. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cower. The store was dim and cool after the brightness outside. Shelves lined with goods rose on either side of a central aisle, and the smell of coffee and tobacco and leather hung in the air. The proprietor, a heavy-set man named Mr. Guthrie, looked up from behind the counter. His expression shuddered when he recognized her. "Mrs. Rothwell," he said with stiff politeness. "What can I do for you?" Rebecca produced her list and began gathering items: flour, sugar, spices, needles, thread, and several other necessities. She moved through the store methodically, aware of Mr. Guthrie's eyes following her as if he expected her to steal something. The awareness made her movements careful and deliberate. She was reaching for a spool of thread when she heard voices outside the store. I am telling you, she was in on it. The whole trial was a sham. But the cowboy testified that he heard Rothwell say she did not know anything. And you believe that. For all we know, she was sleeping with the cowboy too. Maybe that is why he lied for her. Rebecca's hand froze in midair. Heat flooded her face, not from shame but from pure anger. She had endured much over the past month, but this casual assassination of her character while she stood within earshot was too much. She set down her basket and walked to the door. Two men were standing on the boardwalk, both of them minors judging by their clothes. One was older with a tobacco-stained beard. The other was younger, perhaps in his mid-20s, with a mean-looking face. I am standing right here, Rebecca said, her voice cutting through their conversation. If you are going to slander me, you could at least have the courage to do it to my face. The younger man's eyes widened slightly, but then his expression hardened. It is not slander if it is true, Mrs. Rothwell. Everyone knows you helped your husband steal from the company. Everyone is wrong, Rebecca said. I was found not guilty by a jury. Or does the law not matter when it does not give you the result you wanted? The law is not always just, the older man said. Money can buy a lot of things, including lies from witnesses. Rebecca took a step closer, her fists clenched at her sides. Are you calling Henry Hawthorne a liar? Because I am sure he would be interested to hear you say that to his face. I am saying that a cowboy who suddenly takes an interest in a pretty widow is not exactly a reliable witness, the younger man said with a sneer. Rebecca felt her face burn hotter. You know nothing about me or about Henry Hawthorne. You are just angry that you need someone to blame and I am convenient. I am angry that $4,000 of gold is gone and no one has paid for it, the younger man shot back. Your husband is dead, so we cannot get justice from him. That leaves you. That leaves no one, Rebecca said. Because I did nothing wrong. She turned to go back into the store, but the younger man grabbed her arm. His fingers dug into her flesh hard enough to hurt. Let go of me, Rebecca said, her voice low and dangerous. Or what? The man said. You will run crying to your cowboy protector. No, said a new voice, but I might have something to say about it. Henry stood at the corner of the building, his posture deceptively relaxed, but there was something in his eyes that made the younger man release Rebecca's arm and take a step back. This does not concern you, Hawthorne, the older man said. When you put your hands on a woman without her consent, it concerns everyone, Henry said. He moved to stand beside Rebecca, his presence solid and reassuring. I suggest you both move along before this becomes a bigger problem. We were just having a conversation, the younger man said, but there was less confidence in his voice now. The conversation is over, Henry said. There was no threat in his tone, just a statement of fact. But something in his demeanor made both men decide that arguing further was not worth their while. They walked away, muttering to each other but not looking back. Rebecca realized she was shaking. The adrenaline that had fueled her anger was draining away, leaving her feeling weak and exposed. Are you all right? Henry asked quietly. I am fine, Rebecca said, but her voice wavered. No, you are not. Henry gently took her elbow and steered her back into the store. Finish your shopping. I will be right outside if anyone else decides to cause trouble. Rebecca completed her purchases in a daze. Mr. Guthrie tallied up her goods and accepted her payment without comment, though his expression had softened slightly. Perhaps seeing her stand up to her accusers had earned her a measure of respect. Henry loaded the supplies into the wagon without speaking. When everything was secured, he helped Rebecca up onto the bench and then climbed up beside her. They were halfway out of town before he finally broke the silence. You handled that well, he said. Most people would have backed down. "I am tired of backing down," Rebecca said. "I am tired of being treated like a criminal when I did nothing wrong. I know what people think of me, but I will not give them the satisfaction of seeing me grovel." "Good," Henry said. "You should not have to." Rebecca looked at him, at his profile against the harsh sunlight. "They said I was sleeping with you, that you lied at the trial because of it." "I know what they said. I was standing right there." "Does it bother you? The accusation?" Henry shrugged. "People will always talk. If it was not that, it would be something else. I learned a long time ago not to let gossip determine how I live my life." "I do not want your reputation to suffer because of me," Rebecca said. Henry turned to look at her then, and there was something fierce in his expression. "My reputation can take care of itself. What matters is that you are safe and that you are not being treated unjustly. Everything else is just noise." Rebecca felt her chest tighten. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that his kindness was genuine and without hidden motives. But every time she started to lower her guard, some part of her whispered a warning. Thomas had seemed trustworthy too. Thomas had said all the right things, and look how that had ended. "Thank you for intervening," she said instead. "I appreciate it." If Henry heard the distance in her tone, he did not comment on it. He just nodded and turned his attention back to the road. They rode the rest of the way to the ranch in silence. Summer deepened into the brutal heat of July. The temperatures climbed above 100 degrees most days, and the desert seemed to shimmer with waves of heat that made the distant mountains look like mirages. Rebecca adapted to the rhythm of the ranch, rising even earlier to cook before the worst of the heat made the kitchen unbearable. She took to resting during the hottest part of the afternoon, retreating to her cabin where the thick adobe walls provided some relief from the sun. Henry continued to appear with his quiet offers of help. He brought her a wide-brimmed hat when he noticed her struggling with the glare of the sun. He showed her a shortcut to the chicken coop that provided more shade. He fixed the pump in the kitchen when it started making an ominous grinding noise. Rebecca accepted these kindnesses with polite thanks, but she did not invite further intimacy. She kept their conversations focused on practical matters. The supplies she needed, the repairs that required attention, the preferences of the ranch hands. She told herself this was the safest approach, the wisest course of action. But sometimes, late at night when she lay in her narrow bed and listened to the coyotes singing in the distance, she felt the weight of her isolation like a physical thing. She had been married to Thomas for 3 years, and before that she had friends in Santa Fe, a community of seamstresses and shop girls who shared laughter and secrets. Now she had no one. She had built walls around herself so high and so thick that no one could scale them. It was safer this way, she told herself. Safer, but also terribly lonely. One evening in late July, Rebecca was cleaning up after supper when she heard raised voices from the bunkhouse. She paused, listening. The voices grew louder, and then there was a crash that sounded like furniture being overturned. She hesitated, then dried her hands and walked toward the commotion. Several ranch hands were gathered outside the bunkhouse, watching something inside with expressions ranging from concern to amusement. Rebecca pushed through the group and saw 2 men grappling with each other in the middle of the room. One was Rusty, the man who had made the infamous inedible biscuits. The other was a newer hand named Pete who had only been at the ranch for a week. "Stop it," Rebecca said sharply. "Both of you, stop this instant." The men ignored her, too caught up in their struggle to pay attention. Pete landed a punch that sent Rusty stumbling backward into a table, which collapsed under his weight. Rebecca looked around for something to break up the fight. She grabbed a bucket of water that someone had left by the door and threw the entire contents at the 2 combatants. The shock of the cold water made both men stop and stare at her in surprise. "What the hell, Mrs. Rothwell?" Rusty sputtered. "Exactly what I was going to ask you," Rebecca said, hands on her hips. "What is this about?" "Pete was saying things about you," Rusty said, wiping water from his face. "Nasty things. I told him to shut his mouth and he took a swing at me." Rebecca turned her attention to Pete, who was glaring at Rusty with undisguised hostility. "What kind of things?" Pete's eyes slid away from hers. "Nothing that is not true. Tell me what you said," Rebecca demanded. "I said you were probably a thief like your husband," Pete said with a shrug. "And that you probably did other things to get this job. Why else would Hawthorne go to such trouble for you?" The bunkhouse went very quiet. Several of the ranch hands shifted uncomfortably and someone muttered, "Oh hell." Rebecca felt her face go still and cold. "You are fired. Pack your things and be off this property within the hour." Pete laughed. "You cannot fire me. You are just the cook." "She might not be able to fire you," said Mr. Harrison's voice from the doorway, "but I can. And I am. Get your gear and get out." Pete's expression shifted from arrogance to shock. "But Mr. Harrison, I did not mean." "I do not care what you meant. I do not tolerate fighting in the bunkhouse, and I do not tolerate disrespect toward anyone on my property. You are done here. If you are not gone in an hour, I will have you thrown off." Pete looked around at the other men, perhaps hoping for support, but no one met his eyes. He cursed under his breath, grabbed his pack, and shoved his way out of the bunkhouse. Mr. Harrison turned to Rebecca. "I apologize, Mrs. Rothwell, that should not have happened." "It is not your fault," Rebecca said, "but thank you for supporting me." "I support all my workers when they are treated unjustly," Harrison said. "That is just basic decency." He looked around at the assembled men. "Is that clear to everyone else?" A murmur of agreement went through the group. Rusty touched his swelling jaw and gave Rebecca a slightly sheepish smile. "Sorry about the mess, Mrs. Rothwell. Just clean it up," Rebecca said, suddenly exhausted, "and maybe avoid fighting in the future." She walked back to her cabin, aware that her hands were trembling. The confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. It was not just Pete's words, which were nothing she had not heard before. It was the realization that this would keep happening. People would keep questioning her character, keep assuming the worst about her. She could work herself to the bone and conduct herself with perfect propriety, and there would still be those who believed she was guilty of something. She sank down onto her porch steps and put her face in her hands. "Rebecca," she looked up to find Henry approaching through the twilight. He must have heard about the fight already. News traveled fast on a ranch. "I am fine," she said automatically. Henry sat down on the step beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "You do not look fine." "What do you want me to say?" Rebecca asked, her voice raw. "That I am tired of defending myself. That I am tired of being treated like I carry some kind of contagion. That I am tired of being alone." The last words slipped out before she could stop them. She pressed her lips together, horrified that she had revealed so much. Henry was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are not alone." "Yes, I am," Rebecca said. "I have no family, no friends, no one who truly knows me. I am surrounded by people, but I am completely alone." "That is your choice," Henry said gently. "You push everyone away before they can get close." Rebecca turned to stare at him. "That is not fair." "Is it not true?" She wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat, because it was true. She had been so focused on protecting herself that she had not allowed anyone to see past her defenses. "I cannot afford to trust people," she said finally. "Not after Thomas, not after everything." "So you are going to spend the rest of your life alone because one man betrayed you?" Henry asked. "It is safer," Rebecca said. "It is cowardly," Henry said, and the bluntness of it made her flinch. He held up a hand before she could respond. "I am sorry," That was harsh. But Rebecca, you survived your husband's betrayal. You survived the trial and the gossip and all of it. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, but you are letting your fear turn you into someone who is half alive. What would you have me do? Rebecca demanded. Just trust everyone who comes along. Open myself up to being hurt again. No, Henry said. But maybe you could try trusting one person, just one to start with. And who would that be? Rebecca asked, though she already knew the answer. Me, Henry said simply. Trust me. Rebecca looked at him, at the earnestness in his face, at the steady certainty in his eyes. She wanted to say yes. She wanted it so badly it frightened her. But the fear was stronger than the wanting. I cannot, she whispered. Henry nodded slowly as if he had expected this answer. All right, but I am not going anywhere, Rebecca. I will still be here tomorrow and the day after and the day after that. And whenever you are ready, if you are ever ready, I will be waiting. He stood up and walked away, leaving Rebecca sitting alone on the porch steps as darkness settled over the desert. August arrived with even more intense heat, and the occasional violent thunderstorm that turned the dry washes into raging torrents for a few brief hours. Rebecca continued her work, finding comfort in the familiar routines. But something had shifted after her conversation with Henry. She found herself watching him more carefully, noticing small details she had overlooked before. The way he always made sure the newer ranch hands felt included in conversations. The way he helped an older man with arthritis saddle his horse without making it seem like charity. The way he spoke to the horses with gentle patience. The way he never seemed to expect anything in return for his kindness. She watched, and slowly, very slowly, something in her began to thaw. One morning in mid-August, one of the horses in the corral spooked and kicked a gap in the fence. 3 horses escaped and went galloping off into the desert. Henry and 2 other hands immediately mounted up to go after them, but Henry paused by the kitchen door where Rebecca was watching. We will be back by evening, he said. The horses could not have gone far in this heat. They will be looking for water. Be careful, Rebecca said, and then felt foolish. Of course he would be careful. He did not need her to tell him that, but Henry smiled, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. I will. They rode off in a cloud of dust, and Rebecca went back to her work. But throughout the day, she found her thoughts returning to the 3 men out in the desert. The temperature was hovering around 105 degrees, and even with canteens of water, it would be brutal work. Evening came, and the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Rebecca prepared supper and set it out for the ranch hands who had remained behind. But she kept watching the road, waiting for the dust cloud that would signal Henry's return. It was past 7 when they finally appeared. The 3 men looked exhausted and sunburned, but they had all 3 horses with them. Rebecca found herself on the porch of her cabin before she realized she had moved, watching as Henry dismounted and handed his reins to one of the other hands. He saw her standing there and changed direction, walking toward her cabin instead of the bunkhouse. "Did you save me some supper?" he asked with a tired smile. "Of course," Rebecca said. "Come inside, I will get you a plate." Henry followed her into the small cabin. It was the first time he had been inside, and Rebecca suddenly saw it through his eyes. The neatly made bed, the sparse furnishings, the complete absence of personal touches. It looked like a place where someone was temporarily staying, not a home. She busied herself dishing up food from the pots she had brought from the kitchen, loading a plate with beef and potatoes and green beans. Henry sat down at the small table and accepted the plate with quiet thanks. "How did it go?" Rebecca asked. "Better than expected. We found them at that spring about 6 miles west. They were not happy about being caught, but we managed." He took a bite and closed his eyes in appreciation. "This is exactly what I needed," Rebecca sat down across from him, watching him eat. He was so tired that he was almost swaying in his chair, but he had still come here first instead of going directly to rest. "Why did you come here?" she asked suddenly. Henry looked up at her. "I wanted to see you." The simple honesty of it made her chest ache. "Why?" "Because I missed you today. Because I thought about you while I was out there in the heat. Because seeing you makes the hard work feel worthwhile." He set down his fork and met her eyes. "Is that enough of a reason?" Rebecca felt something crack inside her, some last defense she had been clinging to. "I am afraid," she admitted. "I know," Henry said. "What if I let myself trust you and you turn out to be like Thomas? What if this is all some elaborate deception?" "Then you will survive it just like you survived Thomas," Henry said. "But Rebecca, I am not like your husband. I do not have secrets. I do not have plans to betray you. I am just a cowboy who thinks you are extraordinary and wants to know you better. That is all I am offering. That is all I have." Rebecca felt tears prick at her eyes. "That sounds too good to be true." "I know that too," Henry said gently. "But sometimes good things are just good things. Not everything is a trap." She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly that it terrified her. But sitting across from him in the warm lamplight of her small cabin, looking at his honest face and his tired eyes, she felt something inside her shift. Maybe, just maybe, she could try. "Tell me about yourself," Rebecca said. "Not just the surface things. Tell me something real." Henry leaned back in his chair, considering. "When I was 14, my stepfather broke my arm during one of his drunken rages. He told everyone in town that I had fallen from a horse, and I backed up his story because I was afraid of what he would do to my mother if I told the truth. I hated myself for that lie. I hated being a coward. It took me years to understand that protecting my mother was not cowardice, it was love. But I promised myself that once I was free of him, I would never lie again. Not about the big things and not about the small things either. So when I tell you that I care about you, that is the truth. When I say I am not trying to deceive you, that is also the truth." Rebecca felt the tears spill over. "I am sorry that happened to you. I am sorry that Thomas betrayed you," Henry said. "I am sorry that you have had to carry that weight alone, but you do not have to anymore if you do not want to." Rebecca reached across the table and took his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his fingers closing gently around hers. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched him, and the simple contact felt both terrifying and right. "I want to try," she said. "I want to trust you, but you need to be patient with me. I am going to be scared and I am going to doubt and I am probably going to push you away sometimes." "Can you handle that?" "I can handle that," Henry said. "I am not going anywhere." They sat there in the lamplight, hands joined across the small table, and for the first time since Thomas died, Rebecca felt like she might be able to breathe again. The weeks that followed were a slow unfurling. Henry did not push for more than Rebecca was willing to give. Instead, he simply made himself present in her life, steady and reliable. He brought her wildflowers he found growing near the creek. He taught her to ride one of the gentler horses, so she could explore beyond the immediate boundaries of the ranch. He sat with her on her porch in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. His childhood in Texas, his dreams of eventually owning his own small piece of land, his thoughts on the future of the cattle industry. Rebecca found herself sharing things she had kept locked away. She told him about her parents, both dead from cholera when she was 15. She told him about her years as a seamstress, the ache in her fingers from pushing the needle through thick fabric. She told him about the early days with Thomas, when she had believed in their future together. "I keep trying to figure out what I missed," she said one evening as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "There must have been signs. There must have been something that should have warned me. Maybe there were signs, Henry said. Or maybe Thomas was just very good at hiding who he really was. Either way, it is not your fault that you did not see it. But I should have seen it, Rebecca insisted. I lived with him. I shared his bed. How could I not know? Henry was quiet for a moment. My mother lived with my stepfather for years and did not know the depths of his cruelty until it was too late to escape easily. People who want to deceive are often very skilled at it. You cannot blame yourself for being deceived. Rebecca leaned her head against the porch post. I just do not want to make the same mistake twice. You will not, Henry said with quiet certainty. Because this time you are going into it with your eyes open. You are choosing to trust despite your fear, not out of ignorance or naivety. That is the difference. September brought cooler temperatures and the first hints that the brutal summer was ending. The ranch hands began preparing for the fall roundup, repairing equipment and breaking in new horses. Rebecca found herself more at ease among them, joining in their jokes and accepting their compliments about her cooking with genuine warmth. Henry continued his patient courtship. That was what it was, Rebecca realized, though he had never formally declared his intentions. He was courting her, one quiet day at a time, earning her trust through his actions rather than his words. One afternoon, he took her riding to a spot he loved, a place where a spring fed into a small pool surrounded by cottonwood trees. They dismounted and sat in the shade, listening to the water trickle over the rocks. I used to come here when I first started working at the ranch, Henry said. Whenever things felt too hard or I was missing home, I would ride out here and just sit. It is beautiful, Rebecca said. The trees created a canopy of green above them, and the temperature in the shade was at least 10 degrees cooler than out in the open sun. I wanted to share it with you, Henry said. He turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. Rebecca, I need you to know something. I am in love with you. I have been for a while now, but I did not want to say anything until you were ready to hear it. But I cannot keep it inside anymore. I love you. I love your strength and your courage and your stubborn refusal to let the world break you. I love the way you hum when you are cooking and do not realize it. I love how you stand up to people twice your size when they are being unjust. I love you, and I want a future with you if you will have me. Rebecca felt her eyes fill with tears. She had known on some level that this was coming. But hearing the words spoken aloud made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her. I am still scared, she whispered. I know, Henry said. And that is all right. You can be scared and still love me back. Those two things can exist at the same time. What if I cannot be the wife you deserve? What if I am too damaged by what Thomas did? Henry reached out and cupped her face in his hands. You are not damaged. You are healing. And I do not need you to be perfect. I just need you to be honest with me. Can you do that? Rebecca took a shaky breath. Then she said the words that felt like both a leap of faith and a homecoming. I love you too. I fought it for so long because I was afraid, but I love you. I love your kindness and your patience and the way you see the best in people. I love how you never make me feel foolish for being afraid. I love you, Henry Hawthorne. Henry's face broke into a smile so wide and genuine that it transformed him. He leaned forward and kissed her, gentle and sweet, a question and an answer all at once. Rebecca kissed him back, feeling years of fear and loneliness begin to dissolve. When they finally pulled apart, Henry rested his forehead against hers. Will you marry me? I know it is too soon, and I know you might need more time, but I want you to know that is where I am heading. I want to marry you and build a life with you. Rebecca laughed, the sound bright and unfamiliar after so many months of grief. Are you sure? I come with a lot of complications. I am absolutely sure, Henry said, and I do not care about complications. "Then yes," Rebecca said. "Yes, I will marry you. Maybe not tomorrow, but soon, when I am ready." "When you are ready," Henry agreed. "I will wait as long as you need." They were married in October on a day when the temperature was perfect and the sky was so blue it hurt to look at it. The ceremony took place at the ranch, with Mr. Harrison and all the ranch hands in attendance. Rebecca wore a simple dress she had sewn herself from fabric Henry had bought on his last trip to Tucson. It was pale green, the color of new grass, and she had embroidered wildflowers along the hem. The local preacher performed the ceremony under the cottonwood trees by the creek. When the time came for vows, Henry took both of Rebecca's hands in his and spoke in a voice that was steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "Rebecca, I vow to earn your trust every single day for the rest of our lives. I vow to be patient when you are afraid and to hold you when you need comfort. I vow to never lie to you, even when the truth is hard. I vow to love you with everything I am, and to build a life with you that is filled with honesty and respect and joy. This I promise before God and these witnesses." Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face as she spoke her own vows. "Henry, I vow to trust you even when my fear tells me not to. I vow to be brave enough to love you fully, without holding back. I vow to build a future with you that is different from my past, a future founded on honesty and partnership. I vow to love you for the man you are and the man you will become. This I promise before God and these witnesses." When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the ranch hands cheered. Mr. Harrison shook Henry's hand and kissed Rebecca's cheek, telling her he was pleased to have her as a permanent part of the ranch family. The celebration lasted into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than 20 people could possibly eat. Rebecca danced with Henry under the stars, feeling lighter than she had in years. The shadows of the past would always be there, she knew. But they no longer had the power to define her future. Later that night, in the small cabin that was now their home, Henry held Rebecca close and whispered, "No regrets, no regrets," Rebecca said, and she meant it. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Rebecca still had moments when the old fear would rise up, when she would find herself questioning Henry's motives or bracing for a betrayal that never came. But each time it happened, Henry was patient. He would talk her through it, remind her of his love, and then give her the space to work through her emotions. Slowly, day by day, Rebecca learned to trust again. Not the blind trust she had given Thomas, but a more mature trust built on communication and mutual respect. She learned that Henry was exactly who he appeared to be, a good man who loved her and had no hidden agenda. In the spring of 1883, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror. She had always wanted children, but the thought of bringing a child into the world when she still sometimes struggled with her own fears was daunting. "What if I cannot be a good mother?" she asked Henry one night as they lay in bed. "What if I pass my fears on to our child?" "You will be a wonderful mother," Henry said, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "And yes, you might pass some of your fears on, but you will also pass on your strength and your courage and your ability to love deeply. That is what children need most." Their son was born in late November, a healthy baby with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. They named him Samuel Thomas Hawthorne, honoring both families and both histories. Rebecca held him in her arms and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Henry was a devoted father, waking with Rebecca for nighttime feedings and pacing the floor with Samuel when he was fussy. He built a cradle for the baby with his own hands, carving intricate designs into the wood. He sang to Samuel in the evenings, old cowboy ballads that made Rebecca smile. The ranch continued to thrive. Mr. Harrison, who had no children of his own, announced that he planned to leave the Triple H to Henry when he retired. "You have earned it," Harrison said. "You have given this place 15 years of hard work, and you have brought good people here." He nodded toward Rebecca. "I cannot think of anyone I would rather see take over." Henry was overwhelmed by the offer, but he accepted with gratitude. He and Rebecca began to think of the ranch not just as a place where they worked, but as their true home. In the years that followed, they had 2 more children, a daughter named Emma Rose in 1885, and another son named James Harrison in 1887. The cabin became too small for their growing family, so Henry built a proper house with 4 bedrooms and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. Rebecca planted a garden and fruit trees, creating an oasis of green in the desert landscape. The town of Agua Caliente slowly changed its opinion of Rebecca. It helped that she and Henry were regular attendees at church, and that their children were well-behaved and polite. It helped that Rebecca volunteered to help with community events and never spoke ill of anyone, even those who had spoken ill of her. But mostly it helped that time passed, and people moved on to newer scandals and concerns. By 1890, Rebecca had been at the Triple H Ranch for 8 years. She was 32 years old, the mother of 3 children, and the wife of a man who loved her more than she had ever thought possible. Sometimes she would stand on the porch of their home and look out at the desert stretching endlessly in all directions, and she would marvel at how far she had come from that terrified widow standing trial in a dusty courtroom. One evening in late summer, after the children were asleep, Henry and Rebecca sat on the porch swing he had built. The stars were brilliant overhead, undimmed by any artificial light. Crickets sang in the grass, and a cool breeze brought relief from the day's heat. "You ever think about Thomas?" Henry asked. It was a question he had never asked before. Rebecca considered it carefully. "Sometimes, but not the way I used to. I used to think about him with anger and betrayal and hurt. Now I mostly think about him with sadness. He had so much, and he threw it away for something that could never have made him happy. I pity him more than anything." "Do you think you have forgiven him?" "I think so," Rebecca said. "Not because he deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. Holding on to that anger was like drinking poison and expecting him to die. Letting it go was the only way I could truly move forward." Henry pulled her closer, and Rebecca rested her head on his shoulder. "I am glad you moved forward. I am glad you found your way here." "I am too," Rebecca said. "You know, I used to think that what happened with Thomas ruined my life. But now I realize it just ended one chapter so another could begin. If he had never betrayed me, I would never have come to the Triple H. I would never have met you. I would never have built this life that I love so much." "That is a generous way of looking at it," Henry said. "It is the truth," Rebecca said. "I would not go back and change things, even if I could. This life, this family, you are worth every moment of pain I endured to get here." Henry kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Rebecca Hawthorne." "I love you too," she said. "Thank you for waiting for me. Thank you for earning my trust one day at a time." "It was the easiest thing I ever did," Henry said, "because you were worth every moment of patience." They sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead as the desert night sang around them. Inside the house, their children slept safely. Around them, the ranch stretched out, a home built on honesty and hard work. And between them was a love that had been tested by fear and doubt and had emerged stronger for it. Rebecca Hawthorne had learned that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt. It just required time, patience, and the right person willing to do the work. She had learned that healing was possible, that love could exist alongside fear, and that sometimes the worst moments of your life were simply the bridge to something better. Most importantly, she had learned that she was stronger than she had ever known. She had survived betrayal and loss and the judgment of an entire town. She had rebuilt her life from nothing. She had learned to trust again when every instinct told her not to. And she had created a family and a home filled with love. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her. She was Rebecca Hawthorne now, wife and mother and beloved member of a community. She was a woman who had been betrayed but who had not let that betrayal destroy her capacity for love. She was a woman who had been afraid but who had chosen courage anyway. And she was happy. Deeply, completely happy in a way she had once thought impossible. Mr. Harrison retired in 1892, signing the ranch over to Henry and Rebecca. He moved to Tucson to live with a cousin, but he visited often, delighting in watching Samuel, Emma, and James grow. He became a surrogate grandfather to the children, teaching them to ride and sharing stories of the old days when the territory was wilder and less settled. Henry proved to be an excellent ranch manager, earning the respect and loyalty of the hands through fair treatment and smart business decisions. He expanded the herd carefully, never overreaching, and invested in better breeding stock that improved the quality of their cattle. Rebecca continued to manage the kitchen, though she now had help from a young woman named Mary who had come to work at the ranch in 1891. The children thrived. Samuel grew into a serious boy who loved horses and spent every free moment in the stables. Emma was bright and curious, always asking questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how birds knew where to fly when they migrated. James was the baby of the family, cheerful and affectionate, quick to laugh, and always underfoot. Rebecca loved watching Henry with the children. He was patient and involved, never too tired or too busy to answer a question or fix a broken toy. He taught Samuel to ride when the boy was 5, walking beside the horse for hours until Samuel,